Every once in a while, in newspapers, magazines, and biographical dictionaries, I run upon sketches of my life wherein, delicately phrased, earn that it was in order to study sociology and then I became a tramp. This is very nice and I thoughtful of the biographers, but it is quite inaccurate. I became a tramp, well, because of the life that was in me, of the wanderlust in my blood, and that, it would not let me rest. Sociology was merely incidental. It came afterward in the same way that a wet skin follows a duckling. I went on the road because I couldn't keep away from it, because I hadn't the price of the railroad fare in my jeans, because I was so made that I couldn't work all my life on one small shift. Because, well, just because it was easier to do than not to do. This is a quote from the memoir The Road by today's subject, Jack London. Hello and welcome back to the library. And before we get lost amongst the stacks, I want to reintroduce my guest this episode, the conqueror of Plymouth Rock, the ward of Patrick Stewart, the proctor of Posey, the only man to ever answer the call of the wild via AOL Instant Messenger, the wordsmith of West Woodstock, and the Kindle King himself, Mr. Andrew Kenny. Hello, Mr. Andrew Kenny. Welcome back to the library. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Phil. You're saying Kindle King better and better every single time.
Good. I'm glad if I'm going to trip up on anything, Kindle King is the one I'm going to trip up on. Yeah. Are you excited to get part 2 of the legitimately insane life of Jack London?
Yes. Let's roll.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to have to address something with sociology later in this script because I was completely inaccurate in the first one, but we'll get there when we get there. Otherwise, if you're listening to this after part 1 and this is part 2 for you and you're not skipping it, apologies if it sounds different, but hey, look, we're recording this over intercom or, via like whatever intercom was back in the day, aka something that isn't just Teams on my work. Otherwise, we just couldn't do this live. So
we're just yelling at each other through 2 giant shells we found at the beach and hoping we can hear each other.
I mean, honestly, if we were doing that way, like it might end up getting a Grammy Award back in 2005. 2005. 2005 is not a thing. Where we last left young Jack London, he was 15 and had teamed up with young Nelson in a partnership to rebuild the boat and steal oysters. The boat that young Nelson basically split in half. Yeah. Young Scratch Nelson, 20 at the time, was a daredevil who got his kicks off by pushing his boat as fast as possible and intentionally getting inches away from crashing. The two, kind of like an edgelord, actually, kind of like an edgelord.
You took the words right out of my mouth.
The two worked together until they were approached by California Fish Patrol, where things get a little fishy. They clearly got caught doing something illegal, but seeing these 2 young pirates, the California Fish Patrol opened an opportunity to the two. They asked the duo if they would want to join in their efforts in capturing illegal fishermen. The way that Irving Stone, which is the biographer that we're going to quote mostly from this episode and all the other episodes, puts it, is it's definitely time that we should use this language anymore, but essentially the bay was bountiful in all sorts of fish. And since this is like California in the late 19th century, there were a ton of Chinese migrants illegally fishing at the time. He uses different words than Chinese migrants. Let's leave it as that. Okay. There were also a lot of Greeks as well, which I found interesting in Benicia or whatever pronounced in California, because it's a long way from Mykonos. The duo would also get into 50% of the bounty for each person they caught, which is very lucrative, right? Like half the times, they were essentially bounty hunters, for lack of a better term. I know, right?
My Summer as a Teenage Bounty Hunter, coming out on Netflix soon.
Back then, if you were fishing illegally, you'd simply just get fined too. Now, you might go to jail in the U.S. a motherfucking A, depending on how egregious your acts were. Some of Jack's early stories would be about the time he spent as a deputy of the Fish Patrol, so the ones that he wrote, right? Effectively as a licensed bounty hunter. Now, there have been some fair modern criticisms about Jack London and he viewed race. Well, the most gentle way I would put it is that Jack definitely fell into a cultural stereotyping that was very common during the time. And now I'm going to have to approach something that isn't gentle at all, because we're going to talk about socialism, and we're just going to go right now off of it. And he learned to be a socialist, but specifically an Anglo-Saxon socialist. But let's talk about that, like exactly what that means later. It is definitely a form of eugenics, right? We will imminently discuss some cultural stereotyping of Chinese population of this time, one way or another. But Irving Stone definitely did write about it 30 years after he died, basically the same way, which is nuts. I personally don't believe Jack London later in his life hated anybody for just being anybody that was of a certain race, because from my reading and my interpretation, I started with a lot of his later works in life and then progressed earlier, which is a lesson learned here, right? But there's definitely some white racy shit, simply put. You know, if you want to read these stories, they're readily available, but don't get shocked when you learn that one of the titles of the stories is called, quote unquote, White and Yellow. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel you can glean from that.
Yeah. The funny part about this, or not very funny about this, is that it was published in a children's magazine called The Youth's Companion. So no wonder social stereotypes were prevalent among many generations.
Yeah, like also, kids are learning about colors. We got an easy title for them. Don't read so into ridiculous.
It. I know, right? Usually when kids learn about yellow these days, it's from daffodils. But hey, you know what? I guess racism is a very illegitimate way of doing it. Holy shit.
Yes, oh, yes.
Yeah, Jesus Christ. But yeah, it was like a boys magazine, basically, like Boy Scout youth stuff, which, you know, that's where Jack London would get a lot of his money from. But we're jumping ahead, where he was published probably the most. In this short story and in the biography, which is called, again, White and Yellow, because it has to be brought up, Jack and his biographer, Irving Stone, relate a tale where Jack and his partner, I think it's Young Scratch, and the Fish Patrol's quest to capture a large group of Chinese poachers, for lack of a better way of putting it. Both Irving and Jack describe a high-grade net that these illegal fishermen used. Illegal not in the sense that you're illegal immigrants, but also just illegal fishermen. There were tons of them everywhere. Both saying that no one other than somebody from China could have possibly constructed something so fine, which is positive stereotyping, but hey, at least it's not negative. The netting was so fine that the smallest fish couldn't pass through it, which is something that happens to this day. That's a problem all throughout the United States, not just from anybody in different places. You can see how this is probably a problem for the fish and game wardens, right? Like you can't, like literally, like the smallest fish can't do it. It causes complete devastation in one localized area, and now imagine like multiple boats in multiple locations every day in a confined body of water. There's a reason why, like, you know, the San Francisco Bay has been overfished, and this is back then when it started to. I mean, there are no oyster bays in, at least very few, in the San Francisco Bay because of Jack London, because he was an oyster pirate himself, right? Like
he arrested them all with his shotgun and steering with his pinky toes.
Yeah, I know, right? It's like such a fine line that we have to like walk upon about all this shit. But like what, you know, it's just crazy that like culture back in like the 19th century really impacts us to this day, and it has to be spoken about. Jack London single-handedly tracked down and trapped a group of 16 poachers by slamming his boat into one of the ships they were tracking, crumpling the two starboard sweeps and waking the sleeping sailors. The poachers were transferred into the Reindeer. Remember, that was the fucking boat that they were on the entire time. It was the Reindeer. Listen to the end of episode 1. And there, they flashed their knives once at Jack, and Jack being basically alone with one other deputy whose name is just George. George, somewhat understandably, got cold feet facing what counted to be 16 men and 16 knives. George also had a gun, and he pointed it at Jack instead of the 16 people to let the people go before anybody else got hurt. Now, I also suspect he might have been on the take, but that's purely my guess. The next section of this quote comes from his biography, and I had to alter some of the language again here to make it, PC, and I want to be employable, right? Like, I personally want to have a job, but here's what the best I can make. Quote, faced by a gun and 16 Chinese fishermen and knives, Jack thought of the shame of losing his prisoners. He threw one hand into the air and brought his head down. The bullet went high. He then grabbed George's wrist. The rest lunged at him. He swung George's body around to receive their impact, ripped the revolver from George's fingers, and flung him at them, who tumbled and fell over him to the deck, giving Jack time to cover the prisoners with the gun. His share of the fines amounted nearly $1,000, unquote. According to Jack, he was a hero, and according to other couple of people, like, he actually arrested these people. So, like, that's kind of nuts. Jack did this for a few years. He was 17 and growing restless, right? Like, he was a pretty young dude. His feet had an insatiable itch that needed scratching, and only ointment that could be found somewhere in Pacific Ocean could finally satisfy that itch. While he was working on the fish patrol, he spent his free time going to the Oakland Public Library and reading adventure novels. Now, on January 12, 1893, Jack turned 17. 8 days later, he signed before the Shipping Commission the Articles of the Sophie Sutherland, a sealing schooner headed to Japan. This was a massive boat with the purpose of sealing, and yes, that means killing seals for their skin, almost certainly baby seals, right? That's what we're going to be talking about next.
Fun.
Anything you want to do. Things are just getting crazier for his life.
Yeah.
It's nuts.
When you're 18, you normally want to go clubbing, but not that type of clubbing.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine they were baby seals. We'll explain why later. He spent months on this boat, proving that he was an able-bodied crewman. There was a hierarchy on the boat itself, which was staffed mostly by Scandinavians, apparently, who had been sailors since they were children. And according to the author, Irving Stone, the biographer, which was from the biography called Sailor on Horseback, we're using as pretty much the main source material outside of Jack London's memoirs again. Jack had to prove he wasn't dead weight or got this gig through some sort of odd nepotism, unlike their own odd nepotism, because he was American. Jack worked his fucking ass off on the boat. He also mentions in his memoir entitled John Barleycorn that he didn't have access to alcohol for the first time in a very long time, like 3 years, and he made happier for it. This changed when the crew stopped in Bonin Islands. They're now known as, and I'm going to butcher this, I'm sorry, Agasawara Islands, and they're about 1,000 kilometers southeast of Tokyo. I think that's about 333 freedom units, but I didn't even look that up because America. I don't have to look it up. It's still part of Japan.
We have the right metric system.
The correct metric. As long as we're not using stones, we're right.
Yes.
Do you know the stone metric, like the system at all? Oh,
God, no.
Okay. Are you familiar with it?
I mean, I know it exists. I just don't know the conversion of who's a whatsy to what's in McCulloch's.
14 pounds.
Okay, what a strange number.
It's bizarre. Like, look, as long as the UK continues to use the imperial metric system or the freedom units, and as well as the metric system, I'm okay with them using 14 pounds. At least it makes them better at math, right?
Yes. Easy number to multiply.
They refueled at the Bonin Islands with both water and whatever the hell else they needed as well, like things like citrus and things like booze, and gave each sailor the opportunity to get blitzed out their fucking gourd. This is kind of important because at this point, Jack had become friends with 2 Scandinavians, one of which was the type to get as drunk as humanly possible and just become a wrecking ball of a human being, destroying everything in its path. We all know this type. We went to college with this type. We're not going to name this type, but he was initialized, that we all know.
We're thinking of the type. We love the type.
Yeah.
Continue.
He is a sweet person when he's not drinking. After the rest, which turned out to be detrimental for everybody's health, crewmen and locals alike, the Sophie Sutherland sailed off north and then westward towards eastern Siberia to go hunt some baby seals. This was apparently a common killing ground for specifically Americans and Canadians to kill people like, seals, but I'm sure Japanese and Russian sealers were also hunting grounds. Like realistically, this was because these seals were able to transport back into the United States and send them out to Europe. Americans and Canadians just had a better, easier time to do it. It was within high fashion in some ways. Even Jack London said this was mostly for women at the time, which is nuts to think about, but also for other people who needed seal skins for like really, really cold temperature climates. So
Right.
he would probably be using them in some ways in a later episode. But yeah, it was very wasteful. There's definitely a lot of waste going on, but the seals were useful in other ways. Now, the listener may be thinking that I'm being flagrant with how I'm portraying Jack's new profession. Let's listen to Irving Stone's depiction and then judge how egregious I'm being. You ready for this?
So
It's, quote, having filled her water casks, the Sophie Sutherland raced to the north. Jack, who was a boat puller, spent many days binding the oars and oarlocks in leather and sennit so that they would make no noise when creeping upon the seals. Then, one day, the lookout raised the coast of Japan, and they picked up with the great seal herd. North, they traveled with it, following as far as the coast of Siberia, ravaging and killing, flinging the naked carcasses to the sharks and salting down the skins. After Jack had rowed his hunter back to the ship, he went to work with a butcher knife to skin the seals, working each day on decks covered with hides and bodies, slippery with fat and blood, and scuppers running red. It was brutal labor, but Jack, it went under the name of adventure. He loved every hour of it. Unquote. Delicious.
Sounds like a normal job for a young Jack.
I mean, he's 17. Now, remember that story that we talked about, one of the most famous novels? I think it was the
Seawolf.
The Seawolf. Thank you. Wolf Larson is who I'm thinking of. The Seawolf. It's one of these stories that we're talking about right now are what the Seawolf is about. It's really, and I'm going a little bit off the cuff, but it's about like the incredible amount of violence that was in this boat that happened, specifically about the captain and the violence within the crew, the mates, and how he had to be one of the people who will like help to defend himself, and also about sealing. Now, Jack's claims in the book that he was absolutely hunting bucks or whatever the version of male seals were, again going off the cuff, but let's be honest with ourselves a little bit here. That's not who they were hunting. Now, I acknowledge that quote says nothing about baby seals again, but if any listeners familiar with the Single Nature documentary as well as about seals, you'll probably understand the tiny simian creature that is man isn't going to be sneaking up on a full-grown male or female seal, period.
Yes. They're looking for the veal of the sea.
Yeah, delicious. Let's continue the quote to hear about what happens next. Quote, after 3 months, the seal herd having been dispatched, the Sophie Sutherland sailed south to Yokohama, a batch of skins in her saw, and a heavy payday coming. At Yokohama, Jack drank shoulder to shoulder with the men with whom he had faced death and incredible hardship, smiling to himself when he remembered that only 5 months before they had though him a boy who had no right to call himself a seaman. Unquote. When Jack returned home, the first thing he did was get drunk in San Francisco. Then he went home to see his family in large debt, scraping by a few dollars that his stepfather, John London, made as a constable of Brooklyn Township. No, not that one. He was able to pay off his family debt with seal murdering earnings and gave the rest to his mother, Flora, which, listen to the first episode to understand why this is a bad idea to give it to Flora. It's not my dog. And I'm sorry, Quinn. Pay off his family debt with seal murdering earnings is not something I will ever say again.
Yes, exactly. It's like, oh, isn't your average, tips from the restaurant. It's blood and blubber money.
Now, the timeline here is a little fuzzy to me, right? But shortly after he returned home from his sea voyages, Flora was saw an advertisement in the San Francisco Call, Call, a newspaper about, you know, looking for some people to send out short stories for a short story contest. Flora London encouraged her son to enter the contest, and Jack wins it with his first ever published story ever, and his first time ever sending anything out, with a story called Typhoon Off the Coast of Japan. You want to guess twice about what that's about? The second and third place runner-ups were college students, one at Stanford and one at UC Berkeley. I find this uniquely fascinating, the fact that he was able to create and write a story good enough to win a prize, ostensibly on his first attempt. This won't happen again for him. Trust me. This is incredibly impressive. We have to trust Jack's words here, right? A little bit. But one reason I think this is plausible is that Jack had a knack for storytelling that he developed during his early sailing years, his drunken escapades, and the events that we're going to discuss in later episodes and shortly afterwards. He also lived an insane life, and many of his stories are simply things we had done, like he just did these and wrote about them later, either in the first or third person. I can't go into a lot of the details about it because they are literally just giveaways of stories that he's done. It's easier to write what you know than just fabricate things whole cloth. This also poses the question, where did this reward money go, right, Andrew? Where do you think it went?
I'm guessing one of two things, either booze or Flora.
Yeah, it went to Flora. It did go to Flora.
Which something tells me the booze almost would have been better. But I'm also surprised that she supported his entering into this from past, stories of her. I don't see her really being someone who's thinking much beyond herself. So that was interesting to hear that. I thought it would be someone like Prentice or one of the first mates or something telling him.
Well, this is the one funny thing about Flora. Out of all the things that she did as a mother, she strongly encouraged her son to be an artist, which is very unique. In something
right,
that she's
yeah,
done.
no, I guess she did. Yeah,
I agree with you. That was something surprising when I read about it. So, yeah, I think that Flora just wanted her son to be happy, and maybe it was maybe there was something in her get rich quick scheme head that said,
right.
Hey, you might be able to get rich quick after just writing.
Yeah, some coattail thoughts maybe.
Yeah. Now, moving on, but Jack returned home right in time for the Panic of 1893. It's not Panic at the Disco because that wasn't invented until 90 years later. Are you familiar with Panic of 1893, not 1983? Geez.
No, or I forgot what it was. So enlighten me, sir.
It was one of a couple of panics, those panics that happened in the 1890s, which essentially was an economic depression. And like many other economic depression, it was caused by multiple banking crises, a stock market bubble on the railroad specifically that greatly overbuilt at the time and greatly overfunded, and failed economic policies that included high tariffs and increased trade protection. Now substitute the word railroad for words like artificial intelligence, and I think you'll see some similarities today.
Yeah.
But we digress. Jack got a manual labor job, literally delivering coal to firemen. No, not that kind. The kind that literally build up fires. Right? It was at a jute mill, which is a type of mill that processes fibers into fabrics. And those fabrics into twines and other textiles. He was hired to work 10 hours each day and promised to raise his 10 cents per hour to $1.25 a day after a year, which is a whole quarter more than the dollar he was earning a day. His intention was to become a skilled laborer, specifically an electrician, but Jack was lucky enough to get a job alone. He was pretty much helpless otherwise. It was because he was so young that they gave him a job. The guy who employed him got him shoveling coal for less than 10 cents an hour because after the 10 hours he worked, he wasn't entitled to additional pay, and he almost always worked overtime, mostly working 12 to 14 hours a day, which meant he worked for less than 8 cents an hour most of the time. Now, here's a quote from his biography that describes what he did. Quote, once again, he became a work beast. When he reached home in the blackness of night, he was too exhausted to eat. It was all he could do to wash and fall into bed. There was no time or energy for books, for girls, for anything that smacked of life, for he did not even have Sunday off. He lost weight, navigated always in a nightmarish fog of coal, dust, and heat. Once again, he could not understand why he suffered so much on this job. He who had worked at most difficult tasks among older men and stronger than himself. This time, one of the firemen who took pity on him and told him that there had always been 2 coal passers, one for the day shift and one for the night. Each of these received $40 a month. When Jack had come along, young and eager to learn, the superintendent had fired the 2 coal passers and put him in to handle both jobs for lesser pay. When he asked why he had not been told before, the fireman replied that the superintendent had threatened to fire him if he let on. A few days later, the same fireman showed him an article in an Oakland newspaper which told him one of the former coal passers whose place Jack had unwittingly taken and who had a wife and 3 children to feed had killed himself because he could not find work. Jack flung aside his shovel that next day, unquote. That's capitalism for you, baby. Woo!
Yeah, there you go. Work them to the bone. And then if they're there, their bones might be able to work.
Yeah. I mean, he was only able to do this for a few weeks, realistically. It's a long quote. But yeah, that's the kind of work experience as a young person I totally understand you never want to do again. Because he was a smart dude, right? Like, we'll get to that.
Right.
Yeah, it's just tough, overall tough. And a lot of people don't have that option that Jack London did, right? Now, any questions before we get on into this? Okay.
Yeah.
One ramification of all economic depressions is an increase of unemployment, right? And when you have a lot of able-bodied men out of work and with starving families, things get feisty. One way people retaliated against the economic factors, against those, responsible for causing depressions in this period, was to hold marches. This specific march was the first march started and coincided with the mother's birthplace of Massillon, Ohio. So remember Flora Wellman was born in this small town in Ohio. It's just one of those strange American coincidences. I don't know. Ohio was booming at this time. Probably wasn't the realm of possibility that Massillon could have been like thriving metropolises like Cleveland, Cincinnati, hell, even Akron, right?
Akron.
I don't like to joke where people are from. Ohio is Ohio. It's fine. But
we'll just let others do that.
Yeah, exactly. Unemployed men gathered to march upon Washington, D.C., all throughout the country, specifically from Ohio, but there was a western a portion of it. The person who led just the general march was named Jacob Coxey. Insert Coxey jokes. For our purposes and to place it in Oakland, California, the organizer of the Western chapter was a man called General Charles T. Kelly, not a real general, but only of Kelly's army, his own army. Jack, quitting recently from his overworked and underpaid gig, decided to join the army. But he and his mate, who planned on joining with him, literally missed the train they were supposed to get on. So then and there, Jack decides to change his life and just needs a full life change. He starts his journey to catch up with the army while simultaneously starting his brief stint as a hobo in the 1890s of United States of fucking America. Arguably the golden age of the hobo, right?
It's walking around with a handkerchief tied to a big oar.
You're not short on that, dude. Like, it is. I read so much of him just jumping trains. It's just like it's like an action-packed adventure of like a James Bond film, minus all the guns and fighting. Well, no, minus most of the guns, minus the modern guns. In fact, just as many guns, just not revolvers. Uh,
Not as efficient. Oh man, this is
Now,
crazy.
quoting his biographer, quote, he took incredible risks, jumped off trains that were going full speed. At one time traveling so fast through the air that he knocked down and stunned an officer who was standing on a street corner watching the train go by, unquote. That's just good fun.
And you wouldn't mind, but didn't his stepdad get like really badly hurt from a train? And he's like, "Oh, I'll be fine. Nothing's ever bad has happened to my family with trains."
So this is not his first stint on trains, Andrew. Like when he was younger, like even younger than fucking 16 that we're talking about here, right? He basically hopped trains to Sacramento and back on it was just his weekend plan.
Yeah,
And one
just
of
a
his
whim.
friends lost both his legs because they got trampled by a train. So he knows the dangers of trains. Yeah, I know. It's pretty, I mean, train hopping is a thing. It's definitely a thing.
Just quick aside. I was listening to a pod earlier today, and they were talking about how it was an episode on dive bars and how there was one that was so close to the train that people would get their cars stuck. And so it became a thing for the bar that the person would grab their license plates off the car so they couldn't identify it. And everyone at the bar would applaud as the train just absolutely demolish some car because it was just happened so many times that you think people would learn. But so it's like some bars have darts or pool. They just have train crushing car viewing parties.
Oh, geez, that's a fun one. I mean, at our former rugby bar in Last Stop, we used to, every time the train went by, we used to tell people to finish their drinks, and they did. So that's a little bit, kinder. But
Yes.
yeah, that's one way of doing it. Yeah. Speaking of trains, he traveled all the way until he found the Reno detachment of the General Kelly's army, right? Like he made it over. He finally found the army. He got lucky because this occurred in the Rockies in the middle of a snowstorm. All this time, he was basically going door to door, begging for food all over the country while hopping trains. At one point, meeting up with, I think, his sister, avoiding the railroad bulls and the railroad blues, and telling long yards about his travels to anybody who'd listen. I said he was 16, but he's actually only 18 at this time, by the way. The train, like full of men, he finally caught up with Kelly, General Kelly. They ended up in Omaha, Nebraska. Here they thought that the railroads were gonna be okay and they were gonna let him go, but they found out that the railroads actually hired the Pinkerton detectives to ward the men off, which is a big no-no. They were stuck outside for 2 days. And the Pinkertons are just generally bad dudes, right? Like, I'm just going to put it out there. They weren't good dudes, and they're still around right now. They're probably tapping into your phone, just letting you know. Actually.
That's what Red Dead Redemption taught me. Don't trust a Pinkerton.
I mean, don't trust the Pinkertons. They are not good dudes. They are snitches. I mean, I don't. We're all on the Pinkerton hit list. They're basically. I'm sorry. They have so much of our information, guys. I know it's scary stuff, but hey, we live in this world. Yeah. So they were stuck outside in Omaha, Nebraska, in the winter, which is not a great place to be stuck outside for 2 days, being pelted by sleet, hail, and rain, sometimes all at the same time. When finally the general decided to just walk his army to Washington, D.C., where they would join Coxey's army. The army got as far as Des Moines, Iowa, where they started complaining because they were exhausted from walking. That's pretty reasonable. The state's capital was stuck with thousands of men, 2,000 specifically, well, around there, and a total of 6,000 meals a day that they had to pay from the city. They asked the railroads if they could just get the men anywhere from there, any which way, but the railroads refused because they needed to learn a lesson. They weren't supposed to do that. So the town took up a subscription in the sense that they got money from everybody, and the money that they built helped build literal rafts, right? On a river. And they rafted down the Des Moines River. Jack was a captain in one of these rafts. The raft had a total of 10 people, all of whom were able-bodied men. Because of this, Jack's raft was always at least a half a day or a day ahead of all the other men. They would get to a town and get their first dibs on food and necessities. This, of course, pissed off General Kelly and his men, which, of course, it would. Jack did this because at this point of his life, he considered himself one of those people that were like individualist. He believed that individuals had to take care of themselves through their own means, and that society and other people owed him nothing. Of course, the cognitive dissonance of him relying on handouts from other individuals throughout his entire hobo life, or at least this part of it, didn't affect him mentally.
Yeah. That was the old him.
His thoughts on this would change very shortly, right? By the time General Kelly's army reached southern Illinois, much of the army started to desert. This was because the local farmers refused to feed them, and a few days of this drove people to split, right? Of starvation, sure. Jack left as well to go visit and stay at his mother's sister's estate for a few weeks, so his aunt's estate specifically. He moved on from begging and being a hobo once again until he reached Niagara Falls. And here's a quote what happens next, right? And this is important. Quote, he rode into Niagara Falls in a boxcart and headed straight for the falls. Tranced by the spectacle, he remained all afternoon without eating. 11 o'clock that night still found him watching the dark water under the moonlight. He then headed out into the country, climbed a fence, and slept in the field. At 5, he awakened and returned to the falls, and he walked through the sleeping streets. He saw 3 men coming toward him. The men on either side of him were hobos. The one in the middle, a cop who demanded the name of the hotel at which he was staying. Unable to conjure up the name of the hotel, he was arrested as a vagrant and taken into Niagara Falls jail, unquote. Right?
It's behind the water.
it's actually not far from
picturing it literally just like, all right, get your raincoat on it. It's gonna be a little wet.
So he didn't get a trial, right? It took the judge all of 15 seconds to sentence each of the 60 men arrested for vagrancy. There was no jury of your peers, no lawyers, no habeas corpus for any of these guys, right? As a lawyer, how do you think of that, right?
Unethical. They say bring lawyers, guns, and money, and they failed that. So,
I mean, at least one side had all of those.
Yeah.
They each got 30 days at least the minimum, and one of the hobos even picked up an additional 30 days for quitting his job after the judge found out. They were sentenced effectively to being used as free labor, which totally doesn't happen at all in this country. We don't have anything like prisons owned by private interests who bribe judges to produce harsh sentences to lower classes of people to exploit for free labor. It didn't happen to children again in sentences of lower class people in 2022 with a $200 million settlement in this part of Pennsylvania specifically. But I digress. The Erie Canal Penitentiary was right on the Erie Canal itself, so prisoners worked unloading canal boats. The vagrant prisoners specifically were given only bread and water to eat, and once a week they were given meat left over from the soup that was made from like the long-term prisoners, so there was nowhere near enough food for the work that he was doing. Jack got lucky and knew somebody inside already, one of the vagrants he knew, and 2 days into his stint he got a job where he was able to gain more influence over food and the jail in general. These hallmen, as they were called, distributed things and inspected cells. They were also able to steal food from the other places within the prison that weren't as bad. Here's also what Jack London wrote in his memoir called The Road about the kind of power that yielded from how they ruled by fear. Quote, "We were economic masters inside our hall, turning the trick in ways quite similar to the economic masters of civilization. We controlled the food supply of the population, and just like our brother bandits outside, we made the people pay through the nose for it. We peddled the bread. Once a week, the men who worked in the yard received a 5-cent plug of chewing tobacco. This chewing tobacco was a coin of the realm. 2 or 3 rations of bread for a plug was the way we exchanged, and they traded not because they loved tobacco less, but because they loved bread more." Moving on to the quote, We patterned ourselves after our betters outside the walls who, on a larger scale, understood that the respectable disguise, they were merchants, bankers, and captains of industry. They did precisely what we were doing, unquote. His time in the Slammer was certainly a life-changing event. Jack, along with most of the other men, I'd imagine, knew that what was happening to them was a gross misjustice against them and frankly illegal. However, he realized, even though he was pretty vocal about it, that there was no recourse for the violence that was committed to them by the guards, nor would he be able to appeal his conviction in order to reform the system once he got out. He learned a valuable lesson that the systems in place did not care about people like him. Right?
Right. It's a vicious cycle, and it seems like this is kind of like the way he's surviving when he needs to survive in a way, whether it's good or bad or whatnot.
Which is, he had that individualist approach, and now he's going to learn something totally different from it. Jack London's earliest biographer, which wasn't himself, states that he'd be hard-pressed to find a single socialist thought before he became a tramp and got sent to the penitentiary, right? He claims that it was his time on the road, specifically after his arrest and release, that made him change his political ideology. In his very short essay entitled How I Became a Socialist, guess what this is about, Andrew? Published in 1903 at the age of 27, he states that he believed that since he was a young, healthy, able-bodied man, and he literally capitalized the word man, he didn't believe he needed anybody else. Individuals should benefit from their own individual abilities and not rely outside forces for help, like, say, government assistance. It was only after his arrest at Niagara Falls did this change. Quoting the closing paragraph, an argument from this essay, quote, I just think it is apparent that my rampant individualism was pretty effectively hammered out of me, and something else as effectively hammered in. But just as I had been an individualist without knowing it, I was now a socialist without knowing it, withal an unscientific one. I had been reborn, but not renamed, and I was running around to find out what manner of thing I was. I ran back to California and opened the books. I did not remember which ones I opened first. It is an unimportant detail anyway. I was already it, whatever it was, and by 8 of the books, I discovered that it was socialist. Since that day, I have opened many books, but no economic argument, no lucid demonstration of the logic and inevitability of socialism affects me as profoundly and convincingly as I was affected on the day when I was first saw the walls of the social pit rise around me and felt myself slipping down into the shambles of the bottom, unquote. It is excellent writing and effective, right? Like, what a simple way of doing it. Now, I'm going to have to insert here because this is where things have to be a little dark about his socialistic beliefs, and this is where I fully disagree with him. He believed in something called Anglo-Saxon socialism, which is racist and eugenic as shit, right? Basically, like, he believed that as long as the Anglo-Saxon race was the superior race and could outbeat every other race, socialism could exist. It's fucked up, right? Like, it is. And it's crazy because he's not just a full Anglo-Saxon. His father was Irish. So, I think a lot of flora is rubbing in on him on that one. Right. But, like, it has to be addressed that he definitely believed this. And it was later in his life, he started to, like, and later in his life, dude, he doesn't live a very long life. I know,
right? Yeah,
like,
yeah. And in his early 30s.
Yeah, literally, like, I mean, probably younger than we are right now. He started changing that thought, but, like, his early writings, and again, lesson learned here, read his earlier writings before you start the changing on the younger ones, or the older ones, excuse me. He definitely portrayed himself as somebody who, like, had these eugenic beliefs, which, societal or not, is fucked.
Yeah.
Now, we know from his biographer, right, that the socialist writers that he was reading were the pro-socialist, proto-communist thinkers, like, and this is going to be fun because I'm going to butcher some French names. Gracchus Babeuf, Henri de Saint-Simon, and Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, which is Proudhound. He also got a copy of the Communist Manifesto, which is actually pretty light reading when it comes down to Marx. And, I think it is kind of one of those like required reading for anybody who is political at all, even though I've fully acknowledged that like in previous like episodes, I don't read political shit often, but I think this is required reading. Even if you believe that like communist equates Satan incarnate itself, you should read this. Have an opinion after you read it. Obviously, these writers had an impact on Jack London, right? Who was honestly very young to be reading these works. I was 18 when I was reading. Never mind. That's not true. But yeah, like I don't know if you have any familiarity, any comments at this point before we like have any more of his social political beliefs before we move on here, right?
Yeah, no, just keep. I'm learning as we go.
He realized that the physical world wasn't where you can make money, and he wanted to use his mind over his brawn. See the previously mentioned manual labor jobs. He decided he wanted to attend the University of California at Berkeley, which I guess you could just decide you wanted to do back then. But he only went to grade school, right? And hadn't attended a single day of high school. So he moved back home and just enrolled in Oakland High School, which I guess you can just do back then after missing many years. And I love this description by him and his biographer, So I'm just going to quote it all. He was 19 when he entered the freshman class of Oakland High in much worn, wrinkled, and ill-fitted dark suit and woolen shirt without a tie. He was strong and rugged-looking, his face sunburned, his tawny hair disheveled as though he was always ran his fingers through it. He was still chewing tobacco, a habit he picked up on the road and continued when he returned to Oakland because it anesthetized the pain of the numerous cavities in his teeth. When Eliza, his sister, offered to have his cavities filled and to replace the extracted teeth with false ones if he would give up chewing tobacco, he readily assented. Pleased with his shining new teeth, Jack invested in his first toothbrush he ever owned.
He's just like, I'm just picturing the what's his name? The hello, fellow young people.
Yeah. Oh, what's his? God, the actor is so good.
Yeah.
Legit 9/11 hero.
Yeah. Anyways, yes. Insert later. We both know who we're talking about.
Yeah. It's Steve Buscemi.
Yeah.
Great dude. Like everything I heard about him, good guy. So, I mean, again, he's a freshman. His fellow classmates are like 14 and 15. He made no attempt to hide that he was bored out of his absolute-minded class and the schoolwork that he had to do. And he was supremely confident. He was simultaneously supremely confident for basically living a full life of adventure and also intensely shy for feeling inferior to the other classmates. Very, like, understandable. To support himself, he also took odd jobs at night, like working as a janitor at Oakland High School, the place he was attending. And he also was doing things like mowing lawns and working down at the docks fixing up boats. Like, among other things, dude, he just worked so much. His sister, Eliza Shepard, who helped raise him, basically, right? Listen to the first episode. Also helped him financially by purchasing his school supplies and books. I think it's also pretty apparent that he didn't make many friends in high school. His classmates might have been decades younger than him mentally at this point, right? Like, this guy was he was genuinely like an old dude. He still went to J.M. Heinold's First and Last Chance Saloon on a regular basis. Again, listen to the first episode, with rough-looking hobo types, which further isolated him from the classmates when they saw him and the news spread around like wildfire, because of course it did. He was a drinker. He was 19 years old. He was still an alcoholic. He only began to enjoy school when he found out that the high school published its own magazine called The Aegis, Aegis. I think it's Aegis or Aegis. It's Greek. I don't know. I don't speak Turkish. So, man, I just got canceled in Greece. And that was a dumb joke. And where he would publish some of his earliest stories in. Specifically, he recounted his times as a sailor, sealer, oyster pirate, and hobo. And these stories would be typical when compared to the other short stories and novels we will discuss later in the series. He published about half a dozen of these stories altogether. But it's important because, dude, he's publishing for the first time. He wasn't making any money, obviously, off of it. He somehow found time to read. There was no social media back then, so people had more time. He also got his hands on not one, not two, not three library cards. That's how many I have, but 6 from all the members of his family. It's bizarre to me that he was able to rent out all these books from different library cards at the same time, because you had to put a face to the card, literally, but I guess people were more trusting back then. What's more is that he found time to do other hobbies as well. He became a member of the Henry Clay Debating Society, where he met young intellectuals around his age who debated and discussed contemporary topics. They loved Jack's stories about the road and the sea. He also became a member of the newly formed Socialist Party of Oakland and attended social political party meetings and rallies. He actually got arrested at one rally, and the entire time he was being held and arrested, he kept screaming that he was simply exercising his constitutional right of free speech. Like he's one of those guys.
Yeah.
He's totally insufferable.
Yeah, the equivalent of let me see your manager or let me speak to your manager at rallies and stuff. Just
I'm not going to compare him to a sovereign citizen, but I can imagine him similar to that today.
Yeah.
I'm a sovereign citizen. I don't need to have a license. I'm a sovereign. No, whatever. He never did that, but it's just kind of the same people, same vibe.
I was a hobo.
The judge was lenient in his sentencing. This was a time where you could get to jail, and your political beliefs in this country, in some places, didn't really matter. Never going to happen again in our lives. But however, or even the life between Jack's death and the one that's present. However, the arrest ostracized him further from his community, right? He was known as the socialist kid, literally. I think I'll pick up his nickname soon. But that was what he was known as. This didn't stop him from publishing a pro-socialist article in his high school publication called Optimism, Pessimism, and Patriotism. And if high school had this stuff out then, if my high school did, honestly, it would have been radder. So, Andrew, what do you do if you're multiple years older than your classmates, of legal drinking age, and bored out of your goddamn mind with high school and had a B average?
I was going to say you buy them alcohol, but they probably could buy it themselves back then. So
Jack decided he did everything in his power to graduate early. Now, quoting Jack from his memoir, John Barleycorn, quote, 3 years was the time required to go through the high school. I was impatient. Also, my schooling was becoming financially impossible. At such rate, I could not last out, and I did greatly want to go to the state university. When I had done a year of high school, I decided to attempt a shortcut. I borrowed money and paid to enter the senior class of a cramming joint or academy. I was scheduled to graduate right into the university at the end of 4 months, thus saving 2 years, unquote. Apparently, cramming joints were a thing back then, dude. Interesting.
Let me just skip the old academic line here real quick, and I'll meet you at the finish line.
Jack needed money. Want to guess where he borrowed money from?
Either his sister or apprentice.
That's right. He borrowed it from the bartender and saloon owner Johnny Heinold.
Perfect answer.
Johnny gave Jack a 0-interest loan to attend his school and to pay for his university exams. Apparently we used to be a proper country. Jesus.
You drink enough here that I'll get that money back in half a semester.
I mean, we said in the later part of last episode that J.M. Heinold's First and Last Chance Saloon had every right to say that it was where Jack's stronghold was. It absolutely has every right to do so after learning that.
It's his home base. Yeah.
Yep. We know that Jack went to this cramming school for 5 weeks. Jack claims that he made such quick progress that the head of the cramming school refunded his tuition because there was no way the university would believe he made such swift progress. But a bit dubious to everybody because Jack claims to a lot of things. He also claims to have studied 19 hours a day for 3 months, taking breaks on only some occasions and gave up all other hobbies entirely. Sure, probably didn't do 19 hours a day. That sounds like somebody who runs Twitter today. The exams were several days long. Sure. During which he barely slept. Yeah, again, totally believable here. Spending all his time cramming and reviewing notes. At the end of it, he was physically and mentally exhausted. But before he even learned if he passed them, the cure he chose for this exhaustion was immediately getting on a salmon boat, and he sailed the bay for several days, hitting his old landmarks. He then got hammered with his friends at Heinold's First and Last Chance Saloon. It all worked out. He passed the exams. He paid back J.M. Heinold. He began attending the University of California at Berkeley the week after his mini adventure around San Francisco Bay. At arguably one of the most prestigious state schools in this country today, at the time of the recording, Jack would mostly study literature and writing. Quote, I decided immediately to embark on my career. I had four preferences. First, music. Second, poetry. Third, the writing of philosophical, economic, and political essays. And fourth, and last and least, fiction writing. I resolutely cut out music as impossible, settled down in my bedroom, and tackled my second, third, and fourth choices simultaneously. Right? We probably know that the fourth ended up being what he was successful at. He did write the other two, but he was successful at fiction writing. Jack would spend a lot of his time studying at J.M. Heinold's Saloon, which, again, I studied at pubs when I studied in Ireland. It's a thing people do, and I wouldn't say it's like the most academic environments, but, you know.
It's like a coffee shop, but more fun.
I mean, beer does stimulate the brain. It's like generally a thing. Not as good as comfy, but it does. It's just a wild thing to do. Unfortunately for Jack, he was still broke. He had a hard time making ends meet at the time he was in university than he would in high school due to the demanding curriculum. Jack would be studying all the time, and he wouldn't be able to do any kind of work realistically other than a few odd jobs. So he would only attend college for a year before dropping out due to financial difficulties. Now, Jack's stepfather, real father kind of situation, John London, was also nearing at the end of his life. Old wartime injuries and ailments were catching up to him, and Jack had to go to work washing clothing for $30 a month, which he gave to his family almost entirely except for tobacco money, actually. Like, that was the only thing he kept for himself. Jack did not want to work a manual labor job, he knew. So he tried writing a novel, but each manuscript came back rejected. Fortunately for Jack, gold was found in the Klondike River at Canada's Yukon in 1896. Eliza and her husband, who was 60 years old at the time, Eliza was not, but her husband, decided to take their chances on striking it rich. It didn't take much convincing for the 20-year-old Jack London to come along, at least with Eliza's husband. And that's where we'll leave off for now, for his decision to participate in the Klondike Gold Rush would be a fateful one indeed. Right? So we're going to pick up part 3 and probably the most famous part of his life. Any questions?
What would you do for a Klondike bar? Listen to episode 3 on this.
You know what? I didn't even think of that joke. That's great.
Maybe we'll have one while we record it. That's great. I mean, yeah, it's one of those things where it seems like it's like 50 years of stories, even if some of them are a little tall tale or exaggerated, but like crammed into, someone who, is 19, 20 years old is pretty crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. We discussed 5 years of his life there. Right. Yeah. But I think they're 5 pivotal years in the sense that from the short stories I've been reading, right, he's got 3 different sections effectively, and 2 of which the largest ones are his time as a sailor and his time in the Klondike. And that's basically what he has for himself. And the other stories are socialist, pro, very much the political philosophical stuff that people don't get to even have access anymore. So we're nitpicking a little bit here, but I think if we're going to do Jack London justice, let's do him some justice, right?
Yeah, you gotta get all facets of it. You got it.
He's not my favorite writer. I don't think he's probably in the top 10 after reading a bunch of his stuff because he's just so much fun to read about, dude.
Yeah.
Just
oh yeah.
what else did he do? Oh, okay, yeah, he just like started. I don't know, like he made his own company. Where? How? Okay, like I guess things were just easier in
It's very
1892.
it's very and I know I joked about this on the first podcast I did with you with the guys, but it's like almost Forrest Gump like. It's like, and then I rode a train with Bubba, and then we landed, and I was oyster fishing with French Frankie or whatever his name is. This like
French Frankie, yeah.
yeah, little unbelievable stories crammed into one life. So
Well,
interesting.
I mean, I agree with you. It's unbelievable what he was able to do is unbelievable. So I'm going to plug plugs, Patreon, Lost in the Library, also questions, Lost in the Library podcast and Gmail, Instagram, Lost in the Library, Substack. It's my name at Fil Deptula. Sources right now are Sailor on Horseback by Irving Stone. I did pick up another article by The Atlantic for this. Side note, Irving Stone was a popular writer of like when he was alive. He mostly did biographical novels, but like he wrote a few actual biographies, and this is one of them. So it's entertaining, but like this is why I didn't like learn about some of the other racy stuff, right? Otherwise, my sources are Jack London himself, and that's why like that's where some of the mishaps happen. So you live and you learn. I'm just going to have to dig in a little bit deeper, and that is what it is. I don't want to be a podcast that just does generalizations at times and like be wrong, because like I like to do this, but like then again, like I'm doing this for fun, so like I can't be too hard on myself.
Right.
Anything else?
No, we'll pick up where we left off next time.